Flood can be harder to dam back than water. In Sudan, both are flowing. Floods have wiped out dozens of villages in the east of the country. As if war wasn't fatal enough, now they have to bury those killed by torrential rains. It's not yet known how many. More than 100,000 have been displaced from villages that were flooded when the Arbaat dam collapsed.
Wells, boats and farms were swept away by the flood 4 days ago. Before the dam collapsed, it held the water for a bit, but they still couldn't bring in anything from Port Sudan. And now the aid that they've brought in can't be transported, as you can see. The children are hungry and the road is closed.
The leader of the Sudan Armed Forces, General Abdel-Fattah al-Burhan, visited the area yesterday. His trip less about bringing relief and more about trying to show that he's the leader not just of a faction but a government, which doesn't help those forced to flee, initially fighting and now flooding, like Mohassan Khader, displaced from Omdurman to a house west of Port Sudan that's now all but washed away.
We were in Omdurman, but then the war came to us, so we left the city and stayed in this house as God willed. The rain just kept pouring in torrents and people were screaming, "Help us, we're drowning. Where is help? Help us, we have nothing."
1,000 miles to the southwest, Sudan Armed Forces planes have bombed the teaching hospital in the Darfur town of El-Geneina, one of few still functioning in the region. Al-Geneina is occupied by the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. They, for their part, post pictures of their soldiers celebrating victories, but not of the camp of displaced civilians in al-Bashir in Darfur that they shelled yesterday, killing 25 people. Enter a surprising figure, the rapper Macklemore. He refused to play a gig in Dubai last week because of the support the United Arab Emirates is giving the RSF, which the UAE denies. Macklemore has woken up his millions of followers, not just to the horror of Sudan, but to how regional powers are stoking the conflict. That's important. While those Sudanese displaced to camps inside Sudan and neighbouring Chad are in desperate need of aid now, more than anything, they need regional powers to stop arming the combatants and after 500 days bring this cruel and futile war to an end.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Taman Aloudat, President of the Board of MSF Holland, who's recently returned from the region. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Tell us what you found.
Thank you for having me, Jackie. Very happy to be here. The past few weeks, which I've spent in the region of South Darfur, as well as the past years, and particularly the past 16 months, which we as MSF have spent working in most of the conflict-affected areas in Sudan, show clearly a few elements. One is that this fairly neglected and left to the side in the global news and global policy conflict is one of the most horrendous we have seen, despite working actively in more than 70 countries now, including most of the armed conflicts. And this deterioration in the situation is many layers. One of them is the cruelty of the conflict itself. The warring parties are repeatedly and systematically targeting civilians, targeting health facilities, and now we have pretty much 80% of the health system of the country disabled. This gets compounded by, at this point, a heavy rain in a rainy season. This means what you've seen in the collapse of the dam, but also floods, contamination of water, and extreme difficulty in mobilizing any goods or services across the country. Where I worked in South Darfur, in a town called Niala, we've seen the effect of the immediate conflict, which have moved to al-Bashir, as you mentioned, but we are seeing the aftermath of it as well. the violence hasn't ended when the fighting ended. There's criminality that is expanding every day. Sexual violence, we're seeing that consequences of that, both in cases that have been weak and in new cases. And we are following up with that in the sense of there's pretty much no ability to afford food or transportation, which means in our hospitals, we're seeing more and more malnourished children with severe infections.
I mean, it is a terrible cocktail. We know the torrential rains have made things worse. That is a disaster of nature's making. But so much of this is man-made, isn't it? We know that both sides use aid as a weapon. How do aid agencies like yours, for example, deal with that? Are you getting any aid through?
Yes, and absolutely, the rain is natural, but there's nothing natural about the inability, when you have 10 million people displaced because of the conflict, the rain and the floods stop being a natural phenomena where people can cope with their own means. The conflict itself has made them vulnerable. So the effects of the floods and the torrential rains is a consequence of the man-made conflict. Now, there has been a systematic targeting of health facilities and a systematic complication of accessing by humanitarian actors. I mean, again, if I go back to Darfur, we crossed the border.
Very briefly, if you would, sir.
Yes, we crossed the border from Chad. We are able to an extent to deliver supplies. This is limited extensively by the circumstances. And we believe that under the circumstances, it is a shameful shortcoming from both policymakers and donor governments and the humanitarian system, how little is there that is being pushed insistently, both into stopping the conflict and delivering humanitarian aid.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to end it there, Dr. Tanam Aloudat, but thanks very much for joining us. Sorry we couldn't talk more.
Thank you.
Thank you.